Good evening and welcome to Gibson's Bookstore virtual events. I am Elizabeth from Gibson's Bookstore in Concord, New Hampshire, and we are very pleased to be welcoming Michael Koryta in conversation with Lisa Unger for Michael's new event, An Honest Man. Look at that beautiful book. Look at that. We are very pleased to be having this as a group event with several of our friends, our fellow indie bookstores. So I would love to also thank Northshire Bookstore in Manchester, Vermont, Books and Books Miami in Miami, Florida, An Unlikely Story in Plainville, Massachusetts, Once Upon a Crime in Minneapolis, Minnesota, the King's English Bookstore in Salt Lake City, Utah, University Bookstore in Seattle, Washington, and Garden District Bookshop in New Orleans, Louisiana. Those are our event partners. If you are signing in from one of those bookstores, let me know in the chat sidebar which one is your favorite. I know you've got a favorite. We're so excited to be doing this together and having you two here. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having us.
Yep.
Excited to
So the two of you are friends. You have a lot to talk about.
We do.
Please regale us.
All right.
No pressure.
No pressure now. A good.
Let me show your book again because it's so beautiful. I loved it. I loved it. I mean, I'm a longtime fan. I love your work so much, not just because of the amazing writing, but just, also like sort of the deep dive into character and the the atmospheric tension that you're able to create with your settings. So I really loved it. So I'm very happy to have an early read and happy to be here with you tonight. So I talked a little bit to our friend Erin about, some of the topics that we wanted to, touch on tonight. And so she mentioned that, that this book was inspired by a true story. So is that the case? And is that like for you, is it always like maybe, is it one seed or one germ that like kind of, ignites whatever it is that's going to turn into a novel within you? And is that how it worked for An Honest Man?
Yeah, I think for me, it's usually a couple ideas bumping into each other.
Yeah.
I'll have an image and a setting and a character, and it's you need a few things to kind of collide. So the true story element, most people would never really see in the book, because the crime that kicks off the book is this spectacular thing where you have seven people killed on a luxury yacht, and two of them are Senate rivals. So this is not the true story, but the element that really fascinated me, that was taken from real life, was learning there was one law enforcement officer policing all of these islands off the coast of Maine. Which is where my wife and I live part of the year. So there was a murder that occurred on an island called Vinyl Haven, which is a beautiful place. It's gorgeous. It's great. The people are lovely. And anytime I talk about a place that I really love and then lead off by mentioning a murder, that seems like a tough tourism pitch. But the crime element that fascinated me was learning the one cop element. I never encountered anything like that. And then there were some dissatisfactions with the way he was approaching the investigation from people all around. And they actually took a vote to cut his funding.
Oh.
Suddenly, he was quite literally evicted from the island.
Wow.
And I thought, I was a journalist originally, so that just kind of fascinated me on like reporter brain level. And then I began to think, what if you had this one cop, but he was corrupt, and no one could vote him off the island because he ran the island.
Right.
And that kind of connected with the storytelling gear that I was already in, thinking about this guy, Israel Pike, and the idea of a lobsterman who goes out to see this luxury yacht that's just adrift and has kind of a Mary Celeste ghost ship vibe,
right,
and finding these bodies. So it's one idea meeting the other, and then setting's huge for me. I needed the setting.
Yeah, you need to feel that. I mean, because it's such a critical part, I think, of all of your books that I've read. It's such a big piece of it. The sort of man versus nature element of the story. And Israel is such an interesting character. I really I'm always drawn in by these kind of layered people. And he's at the beginning of the book, I don't think I'm giving anything away to say that he's already served time. When he finds this boat, he's already served time for killing his father. And the incident in which that occurred is also quite layered. But maybe we could talk a little bit about Israel, and how did you access him? Like, who was he to you in the writing of the book?
That's a really good question. And who he was early versus who he became shifted dramatically. So
do you find that something that happens a lot for you, that your character starts as one thing and then evolves for you on the page?
Yes, absolutely. Because I don't, how it is writing standalones. It's like you don't really know them. You think you have a sense, but then if you're working in a standalone novel and without an outline, the great thing is you're surprised by the characters, but that can also be a very messy process.
Yeah.
So what I knew I wanted to do with him was look at this island community, sort of a microcosm, through the prism of someone who was coming back, and he understood his version of the island and the community, and the island and the community also thought they understood who he was. And they're both wrong to an extent. And I love those stories where the character's initial sense of a place or a situation is challenged and reshaped. And hopefully the readers is as well, because I think, that more closely mimics the human experience. And I'm thinking of your book here, not just to plug it as a friend, but the galley I was fortunate enough to read, The New Couple in 5B. What you're playing with there is sort of the idea of that classic scenario of the house that seems too good to be true, right?
Right, exactly.
And how it can change identity. And with Israel, he's going back as an ex-con, and people on that island think they know him, but they don't understand the different layers there. So when the book really began to gel, there were two moments. I got to the sentences. The sentence was, Israel Pike was a killer and he was also an honest man.
Right.
They are not mutually exclusive. And so, okay, there I'm beginning to get a sense of him. But really my agent sort of saved the book in a very messy draft when he just began asking a lot of questions that I couldn't answer, and he was driving me nuts. And I thought all of his questions were terrible. And I hung up the phone and I was so annoyed with him. And then about, like 2 miles farther along the road, I was walking and it was like, oh yeah, there's something there. So Richard helped a lot.
That's always the way, right? Like you have these conversations with your editor, your agent, like, how can they be so wrong?
Exactly.
And an hour later, you're like, oh man, they were right.
The worst feeling. No.
Yeah, it is. Well, I thought it was such an interesting perspective from him, because so he grows up in this place, right? This completely isolated tiny place, and there's like some kind of identity that you have there when you grow up in a small isolated town, right? That you can never kind of escape that person who you were. And then not only that, but all these people witnessed the crime, and then he goes off to jail and he comes back to this place, and it's like there's a feeling of being physically trapped on the island, and then there's a feeling of being psychologically trapped in how people perceive him. I mean, is that how the story developed for you, or was that just sort of something that, did you know you were going to find yourself in that kind of box?
I knew I wanted that. Yes, that's a really, really good read. I wanted to bring the pressure. It's on an island for a reason, and you want the external setting to sort of mirror the character's internal situation.
Yeah.
So I wanted him to feel isolated in as many layers as possible. And then I knew Lyman Rankin, who is another point of view character, who's this 12-year-old kid who in the beginning of the book, he has not met Israel, but he knows of Israel sort of by legend in the way, Scout and Jem know of Boo Radley. And they
Right.
think they know, the monster that is.
They know the monster, the story. That's right.
Right. So it was that idea of trying to sort of play with perceptions and identity. And I wanted to do that on different layers, one with the character, obviously. And as you said, there were a bunch of witnesses to his crime. So it would seem as if this is objective and undeniable. We know what he did,
Right.
but there is another layer to that the audience on the island is unaware of. And then I also wanted to kind of dig into the question of how do we define ourselves as a town, as a community? Because this book was written during a period when we began wrestling with that. Okay, you have people who think the past in a certain place is very Rockwellian and beautiful, and other people who think it was terrible. And I really resist the idea that either one is completely right. It's like, no, there are different stories, there are different experiences, and they're all wrapped up in this messy, beautiful thing that we call a community. And Salvation Point Island was my opportunity, to explore those themes, but in a contained sort of environment.
Yeah, and so the other thing that really impressed me was, so Israel is a photographer, like he's turned to photography, and he has this this desire to kind of capture innocence, right? And like that's sort of like, I guess that's probably the first time he sees Lyman, right? Like before he even knows who he is, and he's captured this like sort of, that's like his desire when he gets behind a camera, is that he wants to find innocence. And I feel like, and I don't even know if there's a question in this, but maybe you can speak to it when I'm done. But I almost felt like he was trying to capture this like lost version of himself when he was, seeking out these like sort of these scenes of beauty and innocence. Does that resonate for you at all?
Yeah, absolutely. I knew that he views himself as an honest man, but he knows he is not an innocent man. Israel is sort of, as an archetype, he is the definitive fallen man. But he has a higher level, I think, of self-awareness than many of the other characters in the book on the island, and even within his own family.
Right.
So the photography element, I love the idea that there would always be a filter, a literal filter between him and the world. And what he is trying to do is look into the past and capture something that he was once and cannot be again.
Exactly.
So that was
I felt that very.
When I describe it that way, it sounds very sort of noble and beautiful, right? But so you're a parent. So let me ask you this: if you discovered that someone down the street had taken pictures of your child and you didn't know about it, would your immediate thought be, that's noble and beautiful? Or would there be
certainly not, no.
Right. And I love that. I love the opportunity to, again, like push into, there are two different perceptions.
Yes.
And neither one is entirely wrong or entirely right.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, Lyman, I think there are a lot of parallels to be drawn to between Lyman and Israel, in that, I mean, in Israel's, the event in his life and what he went to prison for, and killing his father, like it didn't happen in a vacuum. Like it wasn't, it wasn't cold-blooded. It wasn't even really intentional. And it springs from, and his choices and his decisions and who he was in that moment, it was all formed from, from dysfunction and abuse. And the same is true for Lyman. Lyman is like basically daily in flight from his abusive father, and most of his choices, spring from that, from that well of being just afraid all the time, abandoned by his mom and afraid of his dad.
Right. And he's on an island, and again, that's the value of setting here, is that it allows me to create this microcosm of a dramatic sort of shell of something that a lot of people experience, which is there's nowhere to run to.
Right.
So Lyman wants to run away from his dad, but he can't.
Yeah.
And you don't need to be on a literal island to have that experience.
That's right.
But
Because
the literal
childhood
island
is kind of
allows
like
me.
an island in itself, being a child and that essential powerlessness of being a child is an island as well.
Absolutely. Yes. So I was just trying to take the dramatic opportunity there to, I would rather the reader feel the thing than be told the thing always. The cliche is, and it's a good one, is show don't tell.
Exactly.
I would rewrite that. I think it's actually feel don't
Absolutely.
tell. The more the reader feels and the less they think.
Yes.
I would say I'm doing my job a little bit better if it's more a felt experience. Would you agree with that? Or
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I mean, I think that there's like this kind of idea about like, so nonfiction, like if you're talking about an actual real event or a historical event, nonfiction, tells you what happened. And a fictional story about the same event will tell you how it felt while it was happening. And so, yeah, I mean, I think we write kind of the same way in that we don't have an outline, and we don't really know what's going to happen day to day, and or who's going to show up or what they're going to do. And for me, like that deep involvement of feeling, like if I don't have that while I'm writing, then I can't give that to my reader. And that connection to character and that ability to feel what they're feeling, and to create that in a like a multi-dimensional way, not just like with exposition, like this happened, that happened, they're on an island, wow, that sucks, whatever, but you have to bring them there, and you have to employ all the senses in order to create that feeling.
And I think if you've done that really well, don't you think that the reader, well, it's very rewarding if a reader says, I thought about A, B, C, and D. If anybody breaks down the book and analyzes it and actually considers what your intent was, that's great.
Right.
But most of the time they will not, and that's a really good thing.
Right.
It's that
they bring themselves
quote that hard writing makes easy reading. Easy writing makes hard reading. That's essentially what we're talking about here, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And like so just talking about Lyman for a little bit longer, I noticed in your acknowledgments that you give a shout out to Gary Paulson. And there is actually a character in the book named Hatchet. Well, that's his like name for her. And was and I wonder, was he a big inspiration for you? Because I know that, a lot of it is a theme that runs through a lot of your books, is the very young character in, extreme circumstances. And you always treat these young characters with like a tremendous amount of dignity. And you very much so inhabit like, it in a respectful way, what it is to be a child who is on the run or afraid. So was he a big inspiration for you? And is this a theme that you find yourself revisiting in your books?
Yes, across the board. So
yeah,
Paulson was a big early influence. My mother gave me the book Hatchet when I was probably like 8 or 9. And it's a great book. He died while I was writing this, which was a shame. But I mean, he was a tremendous writer. And yes, he was writing for children, but he was getting the world right. That mattered. And he was sort of closer to my generation, writing the type of book that was beginning to sort of die off for children. Previously, there have been these writers like Jim Kelgard and August Derleth, and writers who were working in similar worlds, who I knew because my dad had been big fans of these books, but they were publishing in the 40s and 50s, and Paulson was kind of carrying that tradition forward. But I also think those writers, Jerry Spinelli is another one, Angie Thomas, I think I mentioned in the acknowledgments, the children and YA writers who don't blink and don't shy away from the harsh world are
Mhm.
actually doing a really valuable thing, because a lot of the kids who we want so desperately to read books are not in great home situations.
Right.
And if they don't feel any kind of emotional connection to the story, why are they going to, keep reading the book?
Right.
And then conversely, if you're in a pretty good, safe home situation and you read those books, it forces you to consider the world through someone else's eyes and experience,
That's right.
which is a pretty big social gift, I would argue.
Yeah, and it has to be authentic because kids have, a very finely tuned bullshit meter, and if it's
100%.
if it's not authentic, then they literally just can't connect.
No, and I think of writers, Stephen King and Dean Koontz both really stand out to me in this regard.
Yeah,
They write really well from a kid's point of view.
they do.
Reason is because they never dumb down to the kids' thought process and experience with the world.
Right. And they don't flip.
When you're 12 or 13, you understand intellectually that you're not yet an adult.
Right.
But the sophistication of thought is actually pretty advanced.
Absolutely.
So
Yeah.
you need to honor that when
Right.
you're writing from that point of view, I think.
Especially if you're dealing with a smart kid, it's like they have this really interesting perspective in that, there's so much that they don't understand and they haven't told themselves any stories yet to make things okay. So when they see things that are horrific, they're confusing, but they also don't turn away from it. They experience it like I always think about like my daughter, like she would have these like kind of mini tantrums when she was a little kid, and it would be like, I don't know what, like the water isn't wet enough or whatever it is, and like the amount of rage that could just come, like just come out, like it was an adult sized rage, right? Like, so I just always felt that with her, like the feelings are all there, these big feelings, these perceptions of injustices and how things are unfair and like something's horrifying and you don't understand it, but like it's only as you get older that you stop expressing it so so wildly and so freely. You kind of start holding it in, and that's something that I think is important, and that you do so well, is just sort of reflect that like inner, the adult that's inside the child already. Like we think of them as different from us, they're
Right.
children, they're living in a different universe from adults, but they're not at all.
No, it's a shared universe. And the other thing I really loved about writing Lyman was he's in a bleak world,
Yeah.
with a lot of cynical characters. Characters are always telling each other what is impossible.
Right.
And this is my general perception of adulthood. We're always, back, whether it's a business deal or whatever it is, it's like, here's why it might not work.
Right.
That's sort of the price, the scar tissue of every
Right.
added year. And
Right.
Lyman was the kid, the point of view character who would say, well, why is it not possible?
Why can't we do that? That's
So
right.
I'm pretty sure that we actually can. And there's something really fun and powerful about writing from the point of view of the character who should have the least agency,
Right.
and giving him that attitude of, no, maybe this can be done. Which
Yeah.
pushed back against the adults who had already given up on a lot of their own opportunity.
Yeah. And it's funny, I read this book a long time ago called Deep Survival.
Oh,
And
yeah, Lawrence Gonzalez.
yeah, so it's about the the biology and neurology and whatever else of like people who survive extreme circumstances. And one of the things that I remember about that book is that the person who the person who gets lost in the wilderness, the one who's the most likely to survive, is like an 8-year-old child.
It's between the ages. It's somewhere, it goes to an age range of,
Right.
let's say,
And it stops
5
at
to 8.
that's
They
right,
get a
5
little
to
bit
8.
older,
That's right. A little bit older, and the chances go way down, and women are more likely to survive than men. And so children are just very present. They're present in the, they don't understand what's happening, not really. And they don't have a mental model of the world, right? Like, this should be this way and this won't work. And I read that I should do this in this circumstance, so I'll do that. They just respond to what's right in front of them, as opposed to, and that they're
like a 5-year-old, if they're tired and if they're out lost in the woods, if they're tired, they sleep. If they're hungry, they eat. Right. They don't push too far at all.
That's right.
They sort of naturally do all the right things because it is more primal. Whereas as you get, a little bit more advanced, it's like, I can probably solve this. And you have a tendency to
I know if it's that way, for sure.
Particularly us guys, we're very
particularly men.
But then again, hey, I've watched Yellow Jackets, so I've seen how your little gang put it all together.
That's right. We're gonna survive. That's for sure.
Who's wearing the skin suit?
That's right. Yes, that's right. The women will survive for sure, and the kids. You guys, we're gonna see. So can you, I know, well, so I was doing my Michael Koryta research, of course. And I know that you started writing your book, your first book, like very early. Like, your first book was published. You had a book contract by the time you were a sophomore in college, is that right? And you said that you had written four books even before that one was published. So you've been writing novels for like a really long time.
I've been writing
now, right?
Basically for as long as I've been reading, yes.
Right, exactly. And so do you want to talk a little bit about that journey, that moment when you realized that you were going to be able to do this? I think if anybody's watching who's an aspiring writer, I know that these kind of origin stories are always very helpful. So, like, warts and all, like the real deal, not like I sprung from the head of Zeus in full armor, like the actual journey.
But that is the story. Okay. Right. Let me try to fictionalize it then. It was all I wanted to do. And maybe there's like a lack of imagination or human progression and growth there, because you're supposed to go through different, things. But as soon as I understood that it was a job that you could make a living doing it, it really just seemed like the dream job. And, my parents read for pleasure, which is huge.
Yes.
There's so many people who go through our signing lines. I guarantee you hear it all the time. People will ask you, how do I turn my kid into a reader? And it's like, well, do they see you read? That's
right. Exactly.
And then I was just very fortunate. I had a lot of generous people around. I mean, I had writing mentors who shouldn't have given me the time of day, and they were willing to. A guy named Bob Hamill, in particular, who was a sports writer. Michael Heffron, who ran the newspaper in town here. So a lot of people just went out of their way to help.
Yeah.
And even then, though, St. Martin's had a contest for unpublished writers.
Mm-hmm.
I was able to get to some, editors without the agent. Right. I knew nothing about the business at all. I mean, not.
Yeah.
I'd never had a conversation with an agent.
Right. Yeah.
I don't know if it's a strategy that I would say
definitely not
is something like to be mimicked, because now everyone knows too much. As a kid, like, everybody would be following agents on Twitter to inform themselves. And all I understood was what I read in interviews with writers, and Stephen King's book on writing was huge to me.
Yeah, me too.
Because he sort of like pulled the curtain back and said,
exactly,
this is how it works.
That's right.
And he was saying what he was writing was basically the same thing that I was hearing from, like Bob Hamill. It was Strunk and White. It boils down to, if you write well and work hard, good things will happen.
I agree with that. I do 100%. Yeah. I started my first novel when I was 19 years old. And it was the first book I published, but I didn't finish it until a lot later, because, you know, similarly, or maybe contrasting, I, you know, when I always wanted to write as well. From the time I was a kid, I don't remember ever not writing or wanting to write. And I always knew that that's what I was. And even though my parents were readers, you know, my dad was like, hey, that's not a job, you know. So please don't do that. Like, that's not a good idea. And I was like, oh, okay. So, you know, like, not surprisingly, I didn't really have the confidence to pursue it, even though I did also have teachers that, you know, really encouraged me. And so when I left college, I went into publishing, and I worked in publishing for the next 10 years. And that was where I learned that it was a real job. And it took me all those years in publishing to understand that. And so when I did in that book that I started when I was 19, it did, it was the first book that I published. It just took a long time to get there, or to get myself there.
Did working in publishing ever sap the desire to be a writer?
I mean, I had a huge job, right? Like, so unfortunately, when I went into publishing, it was like in publicity, and I was just really good at it. You know, that was the biggest problem I had, right? So my job just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And the time I spent writing just got smaller and smaller and smaller. And then I had this moment where I realized, like, everything about my life was wrong. It was with the wrong guy. It was in the wrong job. And that the only thing I ever wanted to do, I was just letting it fade away. And I figured I could live with, you know, sort of spectacular crash and burn failure, but I wasn't going to be able to live with just a slow fade to nothing. So in that way, you know, it just, like, working a really big full-time job doesn't leave a lot of bandwidth at the end of the day to write. But that I realized at that point that I had to get really serious. Otherwise, I was just going to let the only thing I ever wanted to do just go. You know, but I was wondering too, like, so those books are, you know, those early books, which for me were, you know, a series, you know, they're still out there. They were eventually, they were published under my maiden name and eventually republished under Lisa Unger. And they're still out there, you know, and I still hear from people who are reading those books now. So, like, and I don't know about you, but, like, if I go back to my earlier work, anything, even like what I published last year, like, if I had an opportunity to rewrite it, like, I would, right? Like, do you feel that way, or do you go back and, like, look at your earlier works, and, like, how do you feel about them?
I never go back. It's awful. It's very painful, to the point that if I'm going to read from a previous book,
Yeah.
I will actually print out pages so I can edit and mark it up.
Yeah, totally.
And I try not to read from old stuff very frequently.
Yeah.
The one exception is, so I've never gone back and, like, read a book.
Yeah.
I'm working on sort of a sequel to a book I wrote called Envy the Night, which came out, it's been 15 years now.
Yeah.
And I was imagining what would have happened to the protagonist in that, down the road, you know, if he had grown up. And then, so he's 25 in the book. And I was thinking, what if he had a daughter? And that just sort of started rolling. So I had forgotten a lot of the book, and I had to understand what happened. And my wife and I listened to the audio-book of it while we were driving to Maine, and that actually helped a lot because it was in someone else's voice.
Right.
And,
yeah.
I can't say I have the desire to revisit anything else. It was still sort of brutal at times, but hearing it in someone else's voice, there were moments where I thought, oh, that's not bad.
That's not bad.
Yeah, this is pretty good. But I think it would be awful if you truly, genuinely felt your best stuff had already been written.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. I feel that way about, like, you know, I'm so grateful that I've been able to be writing a book a year for the last 20 years, right? And I feel like if you looked at that book that I wrote when I was 19, you know, the one that I just finished, you know, I finished at 53. And, like, I hope that that book is unrecognizable from that first book, because I've been allowed that journey, I've been allowed to grow as a writer on the page in front of my readers. And I hope it's like, not recognizable, but that on some level it really truly is, like that you can see the threads and, how my vision of the world changed over really the course of my life, which is kind of an amazing thing.
It is, absolutely.
Yeah.
You've got a time capsule that
Yes.
is your body of work, which is a really cool and sacred opportunity. But I understand what you're saying about it better show growth.
It better, yes.
And there were a lot of people in publishing and outside of publishing who never understood. And I just eventually gave up on answering the question, why did you stop Lincoln Perry, who was my series character? And from a business standpoint, it would have been very smart to keep him going.
Right.
But also, this was someone who I was 18 years old when I tried that book.
Exactly. Yeah.
When you say it, you want it to be unrecognizable. There is no way I could have kept Lincoln Perry going into my 40s without it always being. It all feels like kind of one thing then.
Right.
And I think I started way too young. If that had been, if I had said, okay, this is what I want to do. I want to write a series about this guy. And I was 35 or 40 or whatever when I began it, I wouldn't have been as afraid of being always the Lincoln Perry guy.
Yeah.
But so you're 19, you're sitting down with that same, you want to write that book. You love those characters. You don't want to be that thing forever.
Exactly right. And you shouldn't have to be. And I think that there's, an idea in publishing that, or there was an idea in publishing that is what is right and that is what works. But, I feel like when you have a relationship with your readers, they want what you have to offer them. And that when you put yourself to the page, they know that you're giving them the best thing that you can give them at the time of that writing, and that it may not necessarily mean that it's the same character time after time, or in fact, probably not, right? Because you have to honor those voices and you have to honor those stories that you want to tell, and you can't be like sort of trying to stuff your writer's heart into this like tiny little box because your publisher thinks that's all they ever want from you.
And the reader knows so quickly when you phoned it in.
Yes.
I mean, we've all had that experience, and it's one of the most just frustrating and disappointing experiences you can have as an audience member when someone who has delivered consistently time and time again for you, their new book comes out and you realize, you can just tell that their heart was not in it. It's the paycheck book. I
never ever want to do that. Like I in my lifetime as a writer, I have never phoned it in. And if I ever find myself sitting down without that, like that joy, that excitement that you get when you type chapter 1, if I ever find myself sitting down at my computer and I don't have that feeling in my heart, I will not write again. I promise.
I know that is true for you. I know some other people.
It's not true for everyone. We all know that.
It's not.
But that's okay.
I love
some people are doing very well.
Indeed.
In that way. Well, I think I'm taking up, oh my gosh, I feel like we could just keep talking about this stuff forever, which we do in our friendship. But like, so it's 7:45. Should I open it up to questions from everybody else? Hi, Elizabeth.
Back, I was enjoying this. This was a great conversation. I was very much enjoying this. We do have some audience questions.
Okay, great.
And to my audience members, if you do have a question, please throw it into the chat sidebar. We'll get to as many as we can. Our first one comes from Daniel Palmer. I think I know Daniel Palmer.
I know that
guy. The New Hampshire writer. Hey, Daniel. He has a very involved multi-part question.
Wow.
Hey, Michael, Lisa, Daniel Palmer here. Congrats on the book. Can't wait to read it. Can you talk process, plot, prance, What's it like for you? Same with each book. Can you tell us more about your agent's involvement in your process? Any other trusted readers? Give us the deets if you can.
Good to hear from you, sir. And I appreciate the multi-layered question. I definitely, like, I'm a pantser. I would love to be able to outline if I could. I just, it's not the way I work. It's an interesting question about the agent's involvement, because I think my agent is more involved whenever I personally feel as if things aren't working. And the less he's hearing from me, the smoother things are going.
Right.
And I already mentioned he asked a bunch of questions at one point on what I think, the third draft. And one of those questions, to address it would be a spoiler. But I wish I could address it because it was such a great question. And I remember my response to him was, I mean, it genuinely was not, I don't think I'm that much of a jackass. It wasn't like rude, but it was not supportive of his idea at all. It was probably more dismissive. And then, as I said, I walked a couple miles and I realized there was something there. But Richard, and my editor's great, Josh Kendall, in this regard too, where they ask questions and don't try to guide.
Right.
And I don't think I would work really well with someone who is trying to play author and shape the process. And I've been really fortunate to work with really good people. Lisa, what about you? What's your...
Yeah, so I'm an early morning writer. My golden creative hours are 5 a.m. to noon. And that's like my happy place as a writer. I do not write with an outline. I don't like that word pantser though. Because it makes it sound like you just accidentally wrote a novel. Like just I like to think of it more as like a gardener. There's a seed that gets planted, and then like the little sprout grows, and you give it light and water, and like maybe you trim it some, and then finally it grows into over a year into being the thing that it's going to become. So I always think of that first draft. The first draft is just for me. Like, I don't show it to anybody. Nobody reads it until it's done. And then, so once I finish that first draft, I generally kind of walk away from it for about a week, maybe a little bit longer. And then I go back and I start reading from page 1. And I've all that time I've been thinking about it, what's working, what's not working. And then I go back and I start to read page 1, and I that's my second draft. And there might be 2 or 3 drafts before I turn it into my agent and my editor simultaneously. That's how my process works now. Once upon a time, with my first agent, who was my agent for a very, very long time until she passed away, she would write. She was the only person that has ever read as I write.
Yeah, I don't do that.
Yeah. So when it's done, my editor and my agent read it at the exact same time, and then my husband gets it at that time as well. And then they, I do my editorial work based on everybody's comments, notes, etc. And then after it goes to copy editing, after when it goes to production, that version, and Erin reads it sometimes too. She just made a comment.
She did.
Yes,
she did.
Erin reads it too. She's one of my very early readers, but she's the same reader as my mom. They're my first cold readers, Erin and my mother. They're the ones that read the book after. They're the only ones that haven't read multiple drafts.
So. Yeah, I hold my mother off until very late in the game, or she'll try to make me remove all the profanity.
Oh yeah.
So it needs to be already like a locked typeset. We are well into production.
That's right. Like, sorry,
the
Mom.
process cannot be stopped.
That's right. Yeah, Mom is an important part of the process too, because my mom is a librarian, and she's like one of my earliest influences as a writer. So she's an amazing reader, really smart reader. So I look forward to that conversation.
We have a question here that says, I assume this is for Michael. Your bad guys seem to grow in depth, but not always in badness. Is this intentional, or does it just happen?
That's a really good question. I mean, it's definitely intentional, but it depends on the story. So there are some books where I feel as if the villain needs to play, they are on one trajectory, and then others where I want them to have a little bit different nuance. But I think overall across my career, I've always tried to write villains who you understand what they're doing. I'm not a big fan of
Twisty
just saying,
mustache,
this
twisty
is the
mustache.
psychotic person doing psychotic things.
Right.
A rational person doing things with clear motivations that makes you feel as if they could turn left or turn right is, I think, more compelling.
A villain is a hero in his own mind. So, he's
Absolutely.
the villain. He's the hero in his
We all think we're the good guys for the most part. And you can write about people who think they're the bad guys, but they tend not to be intellectually or emotionally compelling. There's not a whole lot of fascination there.
Yeah. We have a question from Aaron, who I believe both of you know. You touched on the fact that neither of you shy away from difficult topics in your fiction. Are there some lines you will not cross in this respect? Is it difficult to write about some of humanity's most horrific aspects?
Sure. It's difficult, but I don't think that means you shouldn't do it. We talked about fiction being, the lie that tells the truth.
That's right.
And it makes you think about the world from other people's points of view. So it's all a matter to me of know your intent, know the moral weight of what you're doing, and then do the best job you can with it. And let the audience be the judge. Let the score take care of itself. I would say the question of, are there lines you would not cross? Sure, but that all of those lines to me would be, are you handling things in a kind of like unserious fashion? With regard to this book, an element of it is the world of sex trafficking. And I refused to write that from the point of view of the victim. And I know there are some writers who have and can and will pull that off in a way that's honorable and respectful. I didn't think that this book needed it. So that's not to say I would never do it. I didn't think the book needed it to convey the horror.
Yeah, I always think there are places that I won't go, and then I always wind up going there. It's almost like I dare myself not to do something, and then I wind up doing it. But I agree with you in that, when in crime fiction, we are writing about people on their worst day, in the worst circumstance that you can imagine. And we're putting these characters in a crucible to see who they are. And often we're exploring things that are, truly dark about the world and about the human psyche. And that you do have to write about it with sort of unflinching honesty and also compassion, and respect for victims and victimhood, and even people who begin as victims and then become, perpetrators because of the abuse that they've suffered. There's so many layers to the human experience. And, I think as long as you're approaching every character in that way with empathy and compassion, and, really taking an unflinching look at some of the horrors that the world have to offer us. I mean, that is why many of us are writing crime fiction. We're using the page to metabolize darkness. And honestly, that's, I think, one of the reasons why readers turn to crime fiction, because they want to look at those things as well in a kind of a safe space, and knowing that there's in our stories a beginning, a middle, and an end. And that some type of justice will be served. It may not be precisely the justice that you're looking for, but it will be something along those lines. Not so in the real world. Justice is not always served. So I think that crime fiction, sort of fulfills that space for, for readers and for writers. It's the place where we go to try to understand things that we don't understand.
There's also, I believe, evidence that you can control your own experience with it, with something that frightens or upsets you. You can put the book down. You have control over the upsetting experience, which can be very validating especially if you have a parallel experience.
That's right. Exactly right.
So I think we have time for one more question, or I guess it's a 2-in-1. What's next for each of you? And has there been a book lately that you'd love to shout out and tell everybody about?
You want to go
What's
first,
next
Mike?
for you, Lisa?
Okay. So up next for me, in the fall, I will be releasing a Christmas novella called Christmas Presents. And it's about a small bookshop owner who has a dark past and an unethical podcaster who is looking to unearth her secrets. And, it's Christmas and there's a blizzard. And so, scary Christmas. Yeah. My unofficial tagline is Lisa Unger ruins Christmas. That's my.
You stole that from me. I had that on my Christmas card 4 years ago. You didn't.
Really?
All right, I want a galley of that.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, for sure. Absolutely. And then in the spring, my novel of psychological suspense, The New Couple in 5B, about an actor and a true crime writer who inherit an apartment in a building that has some dark history and secrets of its own.
Which is really, really good.
Thank you.
I had the chance to read that early, and it's excellent. Has a nice sort of Ira Levin vibe.
Thank you. Yes.
Just very nice, claustrophobic, creepy, wonderful.
Thank you.
What is next for me? Next spring, end of March, my alter ego, Scott Carson, has another return, and it's a ghost story, coming of age story set in Bloomington, Indiana, my hometown, in 1999. And it was, without a doubt, without question, the most fun I have ever had writing.
I need that galley like today.
I've been doing this for a while, so.
You're going to send it, right?
I am going to send it, yes. And it was so nice to go back to that era, to 99, and just remember the world then, see what we got right, what we got wrong in terms of anticipating, the big stories of the day. But I was 17 in 99, the narrator is 17. And I think I just have like enough distance now. I've never written about my hometown before. It evidently required a pseudonym before I felt comfortable about that, which is an interesting thing. And, I just turned 40 last year. So it's like I needed, it's either my midlife crisis book, or I finally just got enough distance to feel comfortable about sort of coming home. But I had a blast with it. Yeah. So I'm excited. And I should say the title. It is called Lost Man's Lane.
I can't wait.
Lost Man Lane.
Lost
Man's Lane. Thank you so much to the two of you. Thank you as well to our event partners, Gibson's Bookstore, Northshire Bookstore, Books and Books, An Unlikely Story, Once Upon a Crime, the King's English Bookshop, University Bookstore, Garden District Bookshop. Thank you so much to all of our event partners. To you two, I hear that you're often in the area. Please come say hello in Concord, New Hampshire. Michael, we saw you like a week ago.
I was just there last week hanging out with you guys. It is a beautiful store.
Thank you. Convince Lisa.
I don't need convincing. All I need is an invitation. I'm there.
Hey, Christmas and a blizzard. I guarantee you, if we schedule a joint event, we can, with my weather history, we will have a blizzard. No question.
Perfect. That would be the perfect event.
Beautiful. Well, I'm making a note in my calendar. Okay. You're stuck with me now. All right. Excellent. Thank you so much to the two of you. Have a wonderful night, everybody. Get an honest man.
Absolutely. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.